It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning coffee. Instead, the world decided to put him on trial in front of strangers. Marcus Gray, a black engineer with a degree from MIT and a mind sharper than any of the officers standing over him, sat in silence as two policemen towered like self-appointed judges, their eyes dripping with contempt. The absurdity of it might have been laughable if it weren't so painfully familiar. Marcus had walked into the cafe the way anyone else would, polite nod to the barista, phone tucked away, ordered a cappuccino with an extra shot of espresso. Yet here he was, his skin color rewriting the script of the morning. One officer accused him of loitering. The other hinted at suspicious behavior. Marcus, dressed in his press suit, laptop bag by his side, looked like any other professional starting his day. But to them, he was something else entirely: a threat, a target, an object of suspicion simply because of his blackness. The room thickened with silence. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. Marcus felt dozens of eyes crawling across his back, watching, waiting. No one dared to step in. Fear was contagious, and the uniforms carried too much authority to be questioned. The officers leaned in closer, their smirks widening as if they were enjoying a private show. One asked if Marcus could prove he belonged there. Another mockingly asked if he could even afford the coffee. Marcus breathed deeply, letting their words wash over him like cold rain. He had heard it before, in airports, on sidewalks, even in boardrooms where his intellect was questioned before he opened his mouth. But something in their tone today carried a heavier weight, a deliberate attempt to strip him down in public, to remind him of the invisible cage they thought he lived in. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was systemic, rehearsed, a performance they had perfected. And the audience sat in complicit silence. A woman near the counter looked down at her phone, pretending to scroll. A man by the window shook his head, but said nothing. Their inaction echoed louder than the officer's words. Marcus could feel his heart pounding against his chest, yet his face remained calm. Years of discipline had trained him to hold composure, to never let them see him crack. In that golden sunlight streaming through the cafe window, Marcus seemed carved from something unbreakable. He knew that reacting with anger would only feed their narrative. They were waiting for him to snap, to raise his voice, to fit into the caricature they had drawn of him. But Marcus carried a secret that would turn their smug expressions into disbelief. He thought about the oath he had taken years ago when he was recruited into an agency that required silence, precision, and sacrifice. His job demanded that he blend in, to never reveal the weight of the secrets he carried. But today was different. Today, his silence would not be surrender, it would be strategy. The officer closest to him leaned down, sneering. "You got ID? Something tells me you don't belong here, pal." The word pal dripped like poison, a mockery of equality. Marcus slowly set his coffee cup on the table, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. The sound seemed to slice through the tension, drawing every eye closer. He reached into his suit jacket, movements deliberate, slow enough to calm the twitching hand of the officer resting near his holster. For a second, the cafe seemed suspended in time. The golden light caught the side of Marcus's face, illuminating his steady gaze. And then, from the inner pocket, he pulled out a black leather case and flipped it open. The letters glinted with authority that no sneer could erase. CIA. The officers froze. Their smirks collapsed into stutters. The silence in the cafe cracked into a collective gasp. Every watching customer sat up straighter, as if the weight of complicity had been lifted for just a moment. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Calmly, almost softly, he said, "You asked if I belonged here. Let me be clear, I belong anywhere I choose to stand." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The officers stepped back, their faces pale, scrambling for excuses. But excuses meant nothing now. Their authority had been dismantled in front of everyone, undone by the very badge they thought they embodied. Marcus slipped the case back into his pocket, lifted his coffee, and took a slow sip, as if nothing had happened. Yet everything had. The room had shifted. Moments earlier, Marcus was the suspect, a target under the suffocating weight of suspicion. Now, in the glow of the morning light, he stood transformed into something beyond their reach. But authority is not easily surrendered, and the two officers weren't about to bow gracefully. Their egos bloated and brittle scrambled for recovery. We were just, routine check. One stammered, voice cracking under the weight of his own unraveling. The other tried to nod, as if this entire spectacle had been nothing more than harmless precaution. Yet the silence of the cafe told the truth louder than their excuses. Everyone had seen. Everyone had felt the humiliation disguised as protocol. Marcus didn't bother answering. He let their words collapse into the void, insignificant echoes against the gravity of what had just occurred. His eyes drifted across the cafe, meeting the gazes of those who had watched silently. Some looked away, ashamed. Others held his stare with a mix of guilt and admiration. A child near the window tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering questions too innocent to be ignored. The mother hushed him quickly, cheeks burning with discomfort. Marcus's chest tightened. He wasn't angry at the crowd. Anger was too small for the weight of what he carried. What he felt was heavier, a grief that stretched beyond himself, beyond this moment. How many times had scenes like this played out without a badge to flip the script? How many men and women had endured the sting of humiliation without an ace hidden in their pocket? He thought of his father, who had once been pulled over on a dark road and never came home. The official report said accident. The whispers in the neighborhood said otherwise. Marcus had been 14 then, old enough to understand but too young to fight back. That night had carved something permanent into him, a silent vow that he would never be powerless again. And yet, here he was, in broad daylight, his dignity questioned over a cup of coffee. The officers lingered awkwardly, shifting on their feet. One muttered something about apologies for the misunderstanding, but the words were brittle, hollow. They wanted to leave, to retreat from the scene they had lost control of. Marcus gave them no nod, no acknowledgement, no absolution. He simply turned back to his coffee, reclaiming the morning they had tried to steal from him. But the cafe couldn't return to normal. Conversations didn't resume. The air remained thick, charged with the electricity of a truth too uncomfortable to ignore. A man in a business suit finally spoke, his voice trembling. That was wrong. What they did. His words cracked open the silence, yet no one followed. His courage evaporated under the weight of dozens of eyes, and he sank back into his chair, ashamed of both speaking and not speaking enough. Marcus glanced at him, not with anger but with weary recognition. This was the rhythm of racism, loud when it dehumanized, quiet when it was exposed. He finished his coffee slowly, savoring each sip as if reclaiming his humanity in defiance of the spectacle. But beneath his composure, something stirred. He had broken his own code. Revealing his badge wasn't just a defense, it was a risk. The CIA did not take kindly to agents pulling rank in public, especially to settle personal battles. His phone buzzed in his pocket, as if the agency itself had already sensed the breach. He ignored it. For now, the moment demanded presence. A young barista, no older than 20, approached cautiously. Her hands shook as she set a fresh cup on his table, unasked for. "It's on the house," she whispered, eyes darting nervously toward the door the officers had exited through. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Marcus looked at her, studying the sincerity in her trembling voice. She was too young to carry the burden of her country's sickness, yet here she was, trying to patch wounds with gestures she barely understood. He nodded, accepting the coffee not for its taste, but for the courage it represented. "Thank you," he said softly. And in those two words, the barista's shoulders eased, as if her small act had found meaning. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Cars honked, pedestrians bustled. The world spun as if justice and injustice weren't colliding inside a small cafe drenched in golden light. Marcus sat back, letting the sunlight warm his face, and wondered how long he could carry both identities, the man constantly questioned and the agent sworn to secrecy. The irony wasn't lost on him. He worked for a nation that trusted him with its most classified secrets, yet its uniformed officers couldn't trust him with a cup of coffee. The phone buzzed again. This time, he pulled it out, glancing at the encrypted message glowing on the screen. A single line, "We need to talk. Now." His stomach tightened. The badge that had silenced his oppressors was also a leash, and he had tugged it too hard. But before he could move, a voice broke through the quiet. "Sir." It was the man in the business suit again, his courage trembling but alive. Would you mind if I asked you something?" Marcus looked up, patient but cautious. The man swallowed hard, then continued. How do you stay so calm? I mean, if that were me, I don't think I could have held it together. The question carried more weight than the man realized. It wasn't just curiosity, it was confession, an acknowledgement of privilege. Marcus thought of answering with the truth, that calm wasn't a choice but a survival mechanism, carved into him by years of necessity. But instead, he offered a version that could be heard. Because if I don't, Marcus said quietly, they win twice. The man nodded slowly, the words settling into him like stones into water. Around the cafe, others who had been listening shifted uncomfortably. The truth had a way of making space for itself, demanding to be felt even by those who wished to ignore it. Marcus stood, slipping his phone back into his pocket, his laptop bag over his shoulder. The barista gave him a timid smile. The man in the suit lowered his gaze. And the rest of the cafe sat frozen in the aftermath of a scene they would carry with them, whether they admitted it or not. As Marcus pushed open the door, the sunlight hit him full force, brighter than before, almost blinding. The golden rays painted him not as a victim, but as something untouchable, unshaken. He walked down the street with steady steps, the city swallowing him whole. But inside his chest, a storm brewed. The badge had silenced two men, but it could not silence the truth. His father's memory still haunted him, his community still bore the weight, and tomorrow another black man would sit in another cafe and face the same trial without a badge to shield him. Marcus knew this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Marcus didn't make it 3 blocks before the black sedan appeared. It slid to the curb like a shadow peeling away from the morning traffic, windows tinted, engine humming with quiet menace. The back door clicked open without a word. He hesitated only a second, then slipped inside. The interior smelled of leather and antiseptic, a sterile cage. A man in a gray suit sat across from him, face sharp, expression unreadable. You made quite the scene, the man said. His voice carried no anger, just observation, the way a scientist might comment on a specimen. Marcus leaned back, adjusting his tie. They forced my hand. The man raised a brow. Your hand? Or your pride? Marcus said nothing. He knew the game. Every word weighed, every silence louder than speech. The car glided through the city, carrying him away from the golden sunlight into the cold machinery of the agency that owned him. At headquarters, the walls were the same sterile white they had always been. No matter how many missions he completed, how many classified rooms he entered, Marcus never shook the feeling of being both essential and disposable. He was led into a conference room where 3 supervisors waited, their faces a mosaic of disapproval. You broke protocol, one said flatly. You revealed classified identity in public, another added. You compromised operational integrity, the third concluded, as if stacking charges on a scale already tipped against him. Marcus folded his hands, his composure steady. I was targeted, humiliated, in front of civilians. I had a choice. Let them strip me of dignity, or remind them I exist beyond their prejudice. The first supervisor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You think the CIA exists to solve your personal battles? Marcus's jaw tightened. I think the CIA exists because men like me fight battles you'll never see. And sometimes, those battles happen at a coffee shop. The room fell into silence. The supervisors exchanged glances, calculating. One finally sighed, rubbing his temples. You're valuable, Marcus. More valuable than you realize. But don't mistake that for immunity. You're walking a razor's edge. Marcus's phone was placed back in front of him. You're on leave. Effective immediately. The words cut deeper than intended. Leave wasn't rest, it was exile. He was being shelved, placed in limbo where his talents gathered dust. He stood, pocketing the phone, and walked out without waiting for dismissal. In the hallway, the walls seemed to close in. Memories surfaced unbidden, sharp as glass. He was 14 again, standing on a dirt road under the red glow of police lights. His mother's scream split the night, her body crumpling when officers delivered their version of the truth. Accident. That was the word they used, as if language could rewrite the bullet holes in his father's chest. Marcus had stood frozen, fists clenched, heart breaking in silence. That night had shaped him, carved a vow into his bones. Never again. Never again would he be powerless. Never again would he watch injustice steal without consequence. That vow had driven him to engineering, to discipline, to the CIA. But no badge could rewrite history, and no agency could erase the brand of his skin. Back in the present, Marcus walked out of headquarters into the unforgiving light of day. He had expected relief in his temporary exile, but instead, he felt a hollow ache. Without the mission, who was he? Without the badge, what shield did he have left? His phone buzzed again, this time not from the agency. A message from an unknown number. Saw what happened. You're not alone. Meet tonight. Attached was an address. Marcus frowned. His instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity gnawed. Who was watching? Who had dared to reach out after the scene in the cafe? He pocketed the phone, knowing full well he'd go. That evening, the address led him to a small community center in a forgotten part of the city. The building looked worn but alive. Murals on the walls depicting fists raised in defiance. Faces of leaders who had refused to be erased. Inside, a group had gathered, men and women, young and old, their eyes sharp with purpose. A woman in her 50s stepped forward. Her hair was streaked with silver, her voice steady as steel. Marcus Gray, you don't know us, but we know you. What you did today, it matters. Marcus scanned the room, uneasy. What I did was lose control. The woman shook her head. No, what you did was expose a truth we've all lived. And you did it with something they couldn't ignore. Another voice, younger, fiery. You showed them we're not just targets. You showed them power can look like us. Marcus raised a hand, stopping the tide. Listen, you think the badge protects me? It doesn't. It only buys me silence. Tomorrow, another brother, another sister, will face the same humiliation without anything in their pocket. And no one will step in. The room grew quiet. His words cut through the hope they had clung to. The silver-haired woman studied him closely. So what will you do? Hide behind that agency? Or stand with us? Marcus felt the question dig deep. He had spent years serving a country that didn't see him, protecting borders that excluded him, carrying secrets that didn't protect his own people. The room's expectant faces bore into him, demanding an answer. I can't promise revolutions, Marcus said finally. But I can promise truth. And truth is more dangerous than any badge. A murmur spread through the group, a spark of belief igniting. For the first time that day, Marcus felt something heavier than survival felt responsibility. Later that night, lying in his apartment, he stared at the ceiling, thoughts colliding like storm clouds. His father's voice haunted him, the lessons unfinished. The cafe replayed in fragments the sneers, the silence, the golden sunlight. He wondered what would have happened if he hadn't pulled the badge. Would the officers have dragged him out? Would the crowd have watched in the same silence? Sleep refused to come. The city outside pulsed with sirens and neon, a constant reminder that the fight was larger than him. Yet, in his chest, the storm found a strange rhythm pain laced with purpose. Marcus closed his eyes, whispering to the dark, "This isn't over." The days that followed were a blur of tension. Marcus lived in two worlds, each tugging at him with relentless force. On one side, the CIA shadowed him like a hawk, reminding him of his oath, his secrecy, his obligation to the state. On the other, the community group demanded his voice, his truth, his courage in a fight older than the agency itself. He felt the weight of both and the cost of betraying either. The silver-haired woman, her name was Evelyn, called him almost daily. "You don't understand, Marcus," she told him once. "That moment in the cafe? It's not just yours anymore. It belongs to all of us. It's a story we can point to, a story that cracks the silence." But the CIA's summons grew louder too. A stern message arrived. "You're being monitored. Stay in line. Final warning." The words were cold, stripped of humanity, a reminder that to them, Marcus was an asset, not a man. One evening, as the sun melted into gold over the city, Marcus walked the streets restless, searching for air. He passed the cafe again. The memory burned fresh. The sneers, the crowd's silence, the sudden turn when the badge appeared. Through the window, he saw the same barista, her young face lit by the glow of the espresso machine. Their eyes met for a second, and she gave a small nod, gratitude still alive. Marcus stepped away, but the scene stayed with him. This wasn't just about survival. It was about the stories people carried forward, the ripples left after injustice collided with resistance. The climax arrived sooner than expected. A week later, he found himself back at the community center, speaking quietly to a small circle about the realities of systemic racism. His words were not fiery, but precise, deliberate engineer's logic applied to human pain. The system is designed to doubt us before we speak, he said. Every silence we accept strengthens it. Every truth we speak cracks it. Applause was cut short by chaos outside. Shouts, sirens, the heavy stomp of boots. Marcus rushed to the door, heart pounding. A crowd had gathered, police lined across the street, armored and armed, demanding dispersal. The community group had been watched, marked as agitators. Tonight, the state came to remind them of their place. Evelyn grabbed Marcus's arm. Don't. They're looking for someone to break. But he couldn't stand still. The memory of his father's body on that dirt road surged forward, mixing with the humiliation in the cafe. He stepped outside, the golden streetlight bathing his face, and walked toward the line of uniforms. A voice barked through a megaphone. This assembly is unlawful. Disperse immediately or face arrest. The crowd trembled, some stepping back, others holding their ground. Marcus stood in the middle, calm as stone. The same officer type as before approached, hand hovering near his weapon, eyes narrowed with that familiar contempt. You again, the man sneered, though they had never met. He wasn't one of the cafe officers, but he was their echo, their shadow. Marcus breathed slowly. He could reach for his badge, flip the case, silence the man again. But something in him resisted. That badge had saved him, yes, but it had also separated him. Tonight, separation wasn't what the crowd needed. They didn't need proof he was special. They needed proof they were enough. So Marcus raised his voice instead. Strong, steady, carried by every ounce of truth he had ever swallowed. You see me as a threat because you were taught to. You see all of us as suspects because your system demands it. But we are not here to break the law or here because the law has broken us. The crowd stirred. Murmurs turned to shouts of agreement. The officers stiffened, shifting uneasily. The megaphone crackled again, but Marcus's words had already pierced the silence. The officer in front stepped closer, anger flashing. Back off. This is your last warning. Marcus stood taller, the streetlight pouring over him like gold. You can arrest me, he said, voice calm but unyielding. But you can't arrest the truth. And the truth is, your power ends where our dignity begins. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The line between collapse and revolution trembled. Then, from the crowd, Evelyn raised her voice. We stand with him. Others followed, voices multiplying, building into a chorus. The sound swelled, a wave crashing against the armor of authority. The officers faltered. They had expected fear, submission, silence. Instead, they faced defiance woven with dignity. No badge, no shield, just a man and his people refusing to shrink. The standoff stretched long into the night, until finally the police withdrew, swallowed by their own unease. The crowd erupted not in violence, but in relief, in victory. For once, they had not been silenced. For once, they had claimed space. Marcus stood in the center, exhausted, heart racing, but alive with something deeper than survival. Evelyn approached, tears shining in her eyes. You chose us, she whispered. He nodded slowly. I chose truth. The weeks that followed turned his moment into movement. Videos surfaced from the cafe, from the standoff, stories spreading beyond the city. Marcus became a symbol unwanted by the CIA, uninvited by the establishment, yet embraced by the people who saw themselves in him. The agency tried to silence him, of course. Meetings, threats, offers of quiet reassignment. But Marcus had tasted something they could not contain, freedom rooted in dignity, power rooted in truth. He turned them down, walking away from the badge that had once defined him. He returned often to the cafe, not as an agent, but as a man. Sometimes the barista would slip him a free cup, shy smile still on her face. Sometimes strangers would nod quietly, recognition in their eyes. He never grew used to it, but he accepted it not as fame, but as a reminder that his story was no longer his alone. And in quiet moments, when the sunlight hit just right, he thought of his father. He imagined him standing there, watching, proud not because Marcus had become a spy, but because he had become something harder, a man who refused to be erased. The golden light always returned, no matter how dark the night. Marcus Gray had lived through humiliation, through silence, through the weight of suspicion. But in the end, he had turned those moments into something unbreakable. Not just survival, not just resistance, legacy. And the world, whether ready or not, would have to face it. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.